My name is Craig Marshall Smith. I was born in Halifax.
I didn't know what the word ghetto was. I didn't hear it even, but I realize now we lived in a ghetto. And I can look back now and say, okay, what were the parameters of that ghetto? North Street.
I lived on Main Street until my teenage years.
Agricola Street.
Primarily between Charles and Garish, and even further down, a little further down, primarily black families.
Wasn't too many white families. Wasn't too many white families.
No. The majority of black people lived on Creighton Street. High density population. There were houses that were like 3 stories high. That were 3 families.
Back in the day, you'd always see people out on the street talking, lean out the window and talk.
How things have changed.
Those were the good old days.
For over 200 years, people of African descent have been an integral part of the fabric of society in the beautiful coastal city of Halifax.
So Halifax has always had this really, I guess, rich and diverse and vibrant community of people historically, and immigrants that have come from different places. From what I understand, one of the oldest cities in Canada.
Through their journey of integration and settlement, the Black community plays an important role in creating a more diverse and inclusive city. This hasn't always been the story, as the community has grappled with the challenge of gaining social acceptance for many years.
It's just amazing when you consider that you had a community that were treated to a large degree as second-class citizens when it came to the way they were accepted around the rest of society and the rest of broader Halifax.
But segregation, per se, you just didn't, somehow I guess you just didn't go places because you just knew you...
I think it was places you knew not to go, like go downtown to some of the clubs that they have downtown.
I can remember at one point in time later on in my life, myself and 3 other people, well-dressed, well-behaved, we went to Sunnyside because there was a place out there, they served beautiful fish and chips, and they had a dance hall, and people would go for dinner and then they'd go to the dance. We were refused. And the response that we got there was, you have dance halls of your own. And that kind of stuck with me. I never forgot that.
And the only other direct racism I encountered, go to the show. It came as a shock to me when we got to the show. Couldn't sit downstairs because we were black. You had to sit upstairs. The same thing that happened to Viola Desmond, eh?
Mrs. Viola Desmond in New Glasgow.
But Viola Desmond came from the community. She lived on Maynard Street. Viola Davis, her maiden name, actually made her own hair care products and her own cosmetics, and then she would go and take those across the province to the communities where the ladies who she had taught were back running their own places. But nonetheless, no UPS, no FedEx, and so Viola would pack up her car and she would go across the province to do that. And of course, she had car trouble in New Glasgow, and thus spent the night there, went to the Roseland Theatre, and was subsequently arrested.
Now, mind you, Viola was a fair-skinned lady, and as she said, we say she had good hair. Hair was always done properly. She was thrown out and actually thrown into jail.
But you see, there you go. Once upon a time, there was no rights. You couldn't challenge somebody that did that to you then. There was no way you could challenge. It was their prerogative. This is the thing. Discrimination was endorsed by society. Okay, so you didn't challenge it. You just walked away.
Now we can boast that we have a black woman from humble beginnings who came from the heart of the black community in Halifax, who now graces our $10 bill. Now, if you want to talk about, the strides that we've made, in some respects, that's kind of the ultimate when you consider she's gone from that to being the first woman to replace Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II as being the face of Canada's currency, with being on the $10 bill. But that still doesn't negate the fact that we still have a long ways to come when it comes to prejudice and second-class citizenship.
Precious Lord, lead me on.
In those days, African Nova Scotians found expression in the Christian religion, and the Cornwallis Baptist Church in central Halifax became a hub where they met to sing, pray, and profess their faith.
That was the kind of the lifeblood of the community, the Cornwallis Street Baptist Church, which of course was founded by Reverend Richard Preston back in 1832.
When I was a kid, my great-grandmother took me to Cornwallis Street Baptist Church, and we listened to Reverend White. Reverend White was the first pastor I knew at Cornwallis Street Baptist Church.
His daughter Portia, who would go on to be a world-renowned classical singer, actually taught school in Appingville while they were living in Halifax, and before she became a professional singer in 1944. But she also directed the choir.
I can remember Deacon Simons singing spiritual after spiritual because he wanted that plate to go around to get more money.
What that church did for the community is it provided the youth of the community an outlet. It gave the opportunity for black youth to come together and do things.
Our people adopted Christianity through colonialism, but at the core of it were still strong spiritual values that predated our exposure to Christianity.
And you know, we're lucky enough today to still have two ladies at Northwood Manor, Margaret Gordon and May Shepherd, who actually sang in Portia White's choir.
Big choir back then?
Yeah, it was a big choir.
Did you sing solo?
No, not
No,
me.
no? Oh.
Early African Nova Scotians had limited job opportunities. They had to overcome challenges of discrimination and limited education, and as a result, they initially established themselves economically by engaging in labor-intensive jobs.
People did what they could, but higher education wasn't something that most people were able to get. Some of the men I really, like when I was on Creighton Street when I was a kid, I can't say that I really know what they worked at.
That was hard times. So you either, the men, they couldn't get regular jobs, so they went on the railroad.
That was the good job, to become a railroad porter. That was the kind of the star job for the black men.
My dad was lucky enough, he did some time on the CNR, working for the railroad.
Father worked in for CN Rail, and the mother was a stay-home mom.
Well, my mother, she didn't have the hope of higher education. And when she went to school, it was the only thing for her was the typical thing for girls of her age at that time, day's work. Because you sort of inherit it from your parents and your grandparents, your grandmothers before you.
So these ladies would have to get up early every morning, get on the bus, go down to the south end of the city into the white homes, clean houses for other folks, do their laundry, take care and raise their children, and then at the end of the day come back home and take care of their own families. That was their existence day in and day out. And in some cases, it was the only steady job that might be in the household because it was a lot harder for black men to get steady work. Some men joined the military, but that again too meant you were going to be out to sea or you were going to be somewhere off at a base. For those that chose to stay home, it was much harder. You could be a laborer, but none of the unions, whether it be the stevedores or any of the other construction sites that were going on, nobody wanted you in the union, and so you could get hired as a laborer for a day, come back and maybe the next day, but you were never given the opportunity to get a card and become a union member and a card-carrying member of that union because that was going to be looked at taking jobs away from other folks or white folks.
Resilience and endurance are considered to be some key attributes that sustained the early black community in central Halifax. These qualities provided the opportunity to participate and excel in the world of sports.
Sports has always been the arena within that community. You know, there have been fantastic athletes that have come out of the inner city of Halifax, or the center of Halifax.
I did play in school basketball, and mostly volleyball back in the day.
In those earlier years, my main emphasis was playing baseball. I played a lot of minor league baseball.
You also have some trailblazers that came out of that area as well. George Dixon, whose parents were from Africville, he was born actually in central Halifax, would go on to be the very first black person in the world to capture a world title in any sport. The great Irvin Lucas, softball player extraordinaire and great athlete, was in the community as well. Wayne Smith became the first black player out of Nova Scotia and the first black player in the CFL to make it to the CFL without ever having played high school or university football, and was a star with the Ottawa Rough Riders. Came out of our community. David Downey, Delmore Buddy Day, boxers, you know, that were both Canadian champions. Whether it be hockey, we've had some great hockey players that have come through. We had the Colored Hockey League of the Maritimes that was actually in the city that started back in 1895 and stretched all the way to 1920.
To sort of gather and have a good time. Maybe it was on the corner of Creighton and Gary Street. Boys would gather. Wherever the boys gathered, we wanted to be gathering.
Gary Street Hall.
Yeah.
Gary Street Hall.
Yeah.
Many dances I did in Gary Street Hall.
The Gary Street Hall is where everybody socialized. It's where, you know, kids went in the Saturday afternoons for matinees, and it's where they went for dances as well in the evenings. So the Gary Street Hall was the socializing spot.
Oh yeah, it was. Not for me, because I never learned to dance.
I remember the Arrows Club, I believe, when it first started, was on Creighton Street. I think 1960.
I was pretty much a homebody a lot of the times.
And I think the reason why his business didn't go, because everybody wanted to get in for free. And I think the cover charge was probably $3. And Billy would just say, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead. You know, anyone who came home in the summertime was a visitor. They can't say they paid because I know I didn't pay. And now I don't think there could be black people trying to get a license to have a club on Goddess Street, but I don't think you'll see it for a while. It's a shame.
While attaining economic and social progress, the black community in Halifax has also found a voice in politics.
I think, as I think down Goddison Street, I think, you know, my first recollection of anybody involved in politics whatsoever in the community or from the community was Graham Downey.
Graham Downey was very quiet. He was deep in what he did because he read the paper from back to front every day. He was really into politics.
And then Graham himself, when he got married, so he stayed on the street that he was born and raised on for the rest of his life.
A really, really nice man.
Wayne Adams. Adams' family has a long history of Creighton Street as well. Wayne, of course, in 1993 would become the first black provincial member of the legislature in our province, and then the first black cabinet minister as well. So, you know, the political realm is something that at least we saw folks that look like us taking part in politics, and so therefore it became something that we might think about doing as well because of that.
The history of African Nova Scotians reaches back to the early founding years of the province. Their ancestors are the first large group of immigrants, the Black Loyalists, who came to Canada as refugees primarily from the United States as slaves and freemen in the 1700s. And to date, African Canadians share significant milestones with their American counterparts.
The word black, it evolved in the American history, so we were obviously exposed to the Martin Luther King movement and things that were happening there. Well, Mr. Obama was something else.
I wouldn't say he was a perfect president, but if our parents could see a black president in the United States, they would think they were in another land.
I mean, I couldn't have been happier than any American or any black mother anywhere.
Oh, I was proud. proud as a peacock, you know. It was long overdue.
On top of the world, I never thought I would see it in my lifetime.
When Mr. Obama and that beautiful wife of his, and they had class. They outclassed everybody. But I'm out of the loop. I don't know what kind of interest our young black people are taking in politics. I don't know if we'll ever see a black prime minister.
I'll have to come back for that one.
You never give up the possibility.
No, dear, I don't think that's going to happen. First of all, are they in the parliament? Don't you have to be in parliament first?
Good question. The closest we ever got was Lincoln Alexander. He was an impressive person, but he didn't aspire to that in that direction. And we have not had anybody that has really been a dynamic enough personality to even give you hope that they might go further. Does that make sense?
The message for me to get to the younger generation is that you have great shoulders that you stand upon, that you have generations that came up in this community that have made contributions to society, that have made contributions to our country.
I feel like at some points there's really a disengagement between the older generation and the younger generation.
The younger generation of today, when they get to my age, I can't imagine that they'd have some funny stories to tell. They've got telephone, too many electronics.
We could be here in Nova Scotia as young people, but be psychologically in another place because we're constantly on our phones, we're constantly watching social media, and we're in a culture of globalization.
And so that's why it's so really important to capture the stories of what was the black community in Halifax.
And there could be like a healthy medium where, you know, the older generation can explain to the younger generation the greatness that's came before them and people who have been here before us, just to make sure that we never lose touch of what we've come from.
There are many important victories that have been won by African Nova Scotians that have paved the way for my generation.
And it's been through recognizing how important their stories were to tell and talking to them that you're able to capture a lot of the stories that were that community.
What came from their legacy is a consciousness of victory. That's an important legacy that's been passed down to our generation that we have to continue to carry that baton.